Long before neon lights flashed across city skylines, before satellites silently circled our planet, there were voices, human voices, carried through firelight and wind. They spoke in patterns, in riddles, in visions. Some called them prophecies, others omens, others still warnings. These were not just tales meant to pass the time. They were the lifelines of communities, maps drawn in memory for those yet to be born. And while some predictions faded like smoke into night, others found their way into reality. Not always exactly as foretold, but close enough to make you wonder if the ancestors had seen something we could. It is tempting to imagine prophecies as distant and impersonal, etched in stone or whispered by mysterious figures in temples. But for many cultures, these predictions were intimate. They came from grandmothers with clouded eyes, from griots whose songs held centuries of memory, from holy men and women whose dreams felt heavy with meaning. They were born from a world where the divine and the human were never truly separate. Take, for example, a vision from ancient Nubia, where a priestess, said to be touched by Amun himself, declared that a son of the south would one day rule the lands of the north and restore its fading greatness. At the time, Egypt was fractured, its dynasties crumbling under the weight of invaders and internal decay. Few believed such restoration was possible. But generations later, Pi of Nubia, black in skin, royal in bearing, marched north not to strip Egypt bare, but to bind its wounds. He rebuilt temples, revived the old ways, and ruled as pharaoh. Was it prophecy fulfilled, or simply history's poetry? Either way, for the people of Nubia, it was a reminder. Destiny was not the sole property of the north. Not all ancient predictions were political. Some were warnings about the earth itself. In the highlands of what is now Ethiopia, elders told of a year when the sky would dry and the rivers would burn with hunger. To outsiders, it was a strange phrase, but to those who listened closely, it was a warning of famine. When drought came generations later, those who had preserved the oral warnings had already built grain stores, dug wells, and prepared routes for trade. Many lives were spared because the story had been remembered. In the Western imagination, prophecy is often about spectacle, flaming chariots, the end of days. But here, it was about survival, about ensuring your people would still be standing when the sky turned cruel. And then, far across the ocean, among the Maya, there was the vision of a pale-faced god arriving from the east, bringing both gifts and ruin. When Spanish ships appeared on the horizon, it was easy for some to believe the prophecy had come to life. But the true story was far messier. This was no god, but an empire wrapped in steel and greed. The prediction may not have been a perfect match, but it prepared some hearts for the shock of conquest. And for those who survived, it became a tool, proof that the ancestors had always known foreign power would come, and that they had warned their children to be ready. We also cannot forget the prophecies of resistance. Among the Maroons of Jamaica, descendants of Africans who had escaped slavery, there was a tale of a day when the mountain drums will speak louder than the master's whip. It was not traced back to any one moment, but woven into the community's belief that their freedom was inevitable. And then came Nanny of the Maroons, a woman whose name still burns bright in Jamaican history. She led her people in defying the British, striking from the forests and disappearing like mist. Whether she had heard that prophecy or simply embodied it, her victories made it feel as if the mountain drums had indeed spoken, and the whip had fallen silent. Predictions are not always solemn. Sometimes, they carry the bittersweet taste of irony. In ancient Mesopotamia, an astrologer told the king of Akkad that a great empire would fall when a certain alignment of planets occurred. The king laughed, confident in his power. But when the day came, it was his own empire that collapsed under rebellion and invasion. The astrologer's words had been true, but the king had never considered that the doomed empire might be his own. Here, prophecy was a mirror, reflecting back the arrogance of those in power. Across history, in every corner of the globe, we find these moments, predictions that didn't always hit their mark exactly, but struck close enough to shape lives. decisions, and legacies. Some we call lucky guesses, others coincidence. But for those who lived them, they were evidence that the ancestors, the spirits, the divine, had been whispering long before the events themselves arrived. For communities whose histories have been erased or rewritten, these prophecies take on even more weight. They become proof of foresight, of agency, of a voice that existed long before colonizers tried to silence it. In Black history especially, prophecy is not just about foretelling, it is about forewarning. Enslaved Africans carried visions in coded songs, warning of escape routes, of revolts, of the promise of a better day. The words might speak of rivers and fields, but beneath the surface, they were maps, prophecies disguised as hymns. One such prophecy, carried through generations in the American South, spoke of a great star falling and the sound of freedom riding on its tail. When the Civil War erupted and news of the Emancipation Proclamation spread, many elders said the star had fallen. Whether it was literal or symbolic didn't matter. The meaning was clear. What had been hoped for in whispers was now being shouted in the streets. In truth, the power of prophecy often lies less in its accuracy and more in its ability to prepare, to inspire, to remind people that they are part of a larger story. For a Nubian farmer hearing of Pi's rise, for an Ethiopian elder recalling the drought warning, for a maroon child hearing the tale of the mountain drums, prophecy was a promise. You are not forgotten, and your destiny is not fixed by those who chain you. And so, as we journey through 10 ancient predictions that sort of came true, we're not just telling historical curiosities. We are tracing a thread that ties Black life stories to the wider human story of seeking meaning, of resisting erasure, of holding on to dignity in the face of forces that would strip it away. These are not just forecasts, they are declarations that the people who made them were watching the world closely, understanding its cycles, and claiming a place in its unfolding. Because in the end, prophecy is not just about the future. It's about the present moment when the words are spoken. It's about who dares to imagine a future in which their people still stand tall, still free, still whole. And that act alone, especially for those who history tried to silence, is revolutionary. Leaders continue our journey through ancient predictions that, in their own way, found echoes in reality. From the desert winds of North Africa to the dense forests of West Africa, we find one of the most haunting predictions, told among the Yoruba people. It spoke of a sea without shore, carrying houses made of trees, filled with men who eat the sun. At first, it sounded like a tale meant for children. But when European ships, vast wooden structures, appeared on the horizon, their sails blotting out the light, the meaning became terrifyingly clear. These were not men who literally devoured the sun, but whose arrival cast a darkness across the land. The prophecy had not stopped the slave trade, but it had given language to the calamity. And in giving it language, it preserved the memory that the ancestors had seen it coming, had named it, had tried to warn their children. Prophecies like this are more than eerie coincidences. They serve as cultural anchors. Even when the oppressor writes over the record, oral histories hold the ink that cannot be erased. For the Yoruba, the sea without shore became not just a warning of what was lost, but a reminder of survival, because even in the darkest night, some of their people endured, carried their language, their gods, their spirit across oceans, the FAR to the east. In the Horn of Africa, Somali oral tradition tells of a year when the camels will cry, and the red dust will hide the sky. Historians today believe this referred to a time of catastrophic war, when foreign invaders would march across the land. Generations later, during the Italian occupation of the early 20th century, the prophecy took on chilling clarity. Tanks rolled through the desert, dust rose like a second sky, and villages burned. Some elders whispered that the prophecy had returned to collect its due. Yet in the same breath, they remembered that the old version of the prophecy included one more line. But the rivers will run again, and the land will speak our name. That final line became the lifeline of resistance, a belief that no foreign empire could keep the Somali spirit buried forever. Prophecy is not always bound to a single culture. It travels, bends, and reemerges. Among the Ashanti of West Africa, there was a foretelling that the golden stool will never rest in the hands of strangers without a fight. The golden stool, a sacred symbol of Ashanti unity and sovereignty, was more than a throne. It was the soul of the nation. When the British demanded it in 1900, it was not simply a political insult. It was a spiritual assault. In answer came Santoire, the Queen Mother, who led her people into war rather than surrender their symbol. The prophecy was not entirely literal. The stool was hidden, never taken. But the fight was real, and it became a living testament to the Ashanti will. The prophecy had said there would be resistance, and resistance there was. These moments force us to see prophecy not as mere fortune-telling, but as a way of setting the moral compass. A people told they will one day rise again will rise more fiercely. A people told the fight will come will be less afraid when it does. Even in the ancient Mediterranean world, we find similar currents. There is an old account from Carthage, a great North African city, that speaks of a war from across the sea that would break their walls but spread their bloodlines across the earth. When Rome finally destroyed Carthage, scattering its people as slaves across the empire, the prophecy's bitter truth unfolded. But scattered seeds can still take root, and Carthaginian blood flowed into many corners of the Mediterranean, quietly altering cultures in ways no Roman sword could undo. Then there are predictions that seem almost uncanny in their detail. Among the Dogon people of Mali, there are stories passed down for centuries describing the star Sirius not as one point of light, but as two, the main star and a smaller, denser one invisible to the naked eye. Modern astronomy confirmed the existence of Sirius B only in the 19th century. Skeptics debate whether this knowledge came through ancient contact or coincidence. But for the Dogon, the point is not scientific bragging rights. It is that their ancestors' words were rooted in an understanding of the cosmos that outsiders long underestimated. In a world that often treats African knowledge systems as primitive, such prophecies reclaim the truth the ancestors were observing, measuring, knowing that prophecies can also shape political action far beyond their original moment. In Haiti, before the Great Revolution of 1791, enslaved Africans and their descendants gathered at Bois Cayman. Oral accounts tell of a Vodou priest and priestess who declared that the spirits had foretold the downfall of the slave masters and the birth of a free black nation. This was no vague prediction. It was a call to arms, a promise that the blood shed would water the tree of liberty. Weeks later, the rebellion began, and within little more than a decade, Haiti stood as the first free black republic in the Americas. In this case, prophecy did not sort of come true. It was dragged into reality by the hands of those who believed it enough to act. And finally, we return to a truth found in many traditions. That prophecy is not always about a single event, but about a cycle. The Zulu spoke of a time when the cattle will vanish, the soil will turn to dust, and the people will scatter like leaves before the wind. This was remembered during the colonial wars of the 19th century, when dispossession, famine, and forced migration tore at the heart of their society. Yet the same tradition also promised renewal. The cattle will return, the rains will come, and the people will stand as the hills stand. That second half of the prophecy is still being claimed today. In every act of cultural revival, in every language class, in every song sung in Zulu that refuses to be forgotten. Across these 10 stories, one thing becomes clear. Ancient predictions are not museum pieces. They are living threads in the fabric of history. Sometimes they are uncanny in their accuracy. Other times they shift in meaning over centuries. But in every case, they remind us that our ancestors were not passive witnesses to history. They were thinkers, dreamers, strategists. They read the earth and the sky and the patterns of power, and they dared to imagine a future that stretched beyond the limits set by others at FO or Black Life Stories. Prophecy holds a special place. In a world that has tried, time and again, to narrow the narrative of Black existence to suffering and survival, prophecy insists on something larger. It insists on foresight, on preparation, on self-determination. It says, "We were always more than what was done to us." So when we speak of these ancient predictions that sort of came true, we are not just indulging in historical curiosity. We are restoring a record of intellectual brilliance and cultural resilience. We are honoring the voices that dared to speak of what was to come, knowing they might never live to see it. We are, in a sense, fulfilling those prophecies ourselves by remembering them, by telling them, by refusing to let them vanish into silence. Because in the end, prophecy's greatest power is not in predicting the future, it's in giving a people the courage to build it. If you enjoyed this journey, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell so you never miss an adventure into history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.